Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be approaching the topic of education from a bit of a different angle, and that is teachers educating teachers. Our subject today concerns instructing and advising current or potential mentors in the biomedical sciences on how to think and behave with more awareness. At the end of the video, there will be a homework assignment for those interested, which you can take part in using the comments section. You can blame this homework on Laura Bones, because, quite literally, she asked for it. All that being said, let's begin.
Hello, my name is Angela Byers-Winston, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Hi, Angela.
And I'm Sandra Quinn, and I am a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Maryland in College Park.
Hello, Sandra. What will we be learning today from iBiology?
And our topic today with you is on culturally aware mentoring.
Yes, today's lesson is on wordplay, because, as we'll see, the phrase culturally aware is a more high-minded way of saying focused inordinately on skin color. But I'll let our two doctors explain.
All across the academic career stages, science is losing talent.
Science is losing talent. So, qualified and talented scientists are just dropping out of the field of science?
We're losing people who come from historically underrepresented backgrounds. And by that we mean African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, some Southeastern Asian populations who fall out of the career trajectory some point along the way.
They fall out of the career trajectory at some point along the way. Well, I can't wait to hear your theories on why that might be, and your suggested solutions.
And so scientists often say, well, scientists are scientists, aren't they? Mm-hmm. And so race doesn't matter.
You're correct. Race does not matter. Race does not determine the degree of intellectual skill or scientific curiosity that someone might possess. Very good. Boy, I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Or does it? And that's the question we're going to talk about.
Right. Okay. Let's hear how someone's skin color is an important factor in whether or not they can participate in science.
A lot of studies have really said that when we diversify the biomedical research workforce, that we're going to actually have better science. And why? Mm-hmm. Because people from different backgrounds may draw upon different theories. They may ask different research questions. They may recruit their participants for studies in different ways.
They may offer different techniques for collecting data.
Absolutely. All of that will enrich the scientific enterprise.
So, if I'm understanding you, skin color equals cultural difference. A black man from Brooklyn and a white man from Brooklyn both grew up in the same environment in American culture, but because one's skin color is one way and the other's is another way, this separates them from being considered to possessing a common cultural background. That's an interesting perspective to have when assessing people on how they look. But please, continue.
And so the question really is, well, why are we struggling with this issue? So the conversations about why we lack diversity really are often not happening because they're left to those people who are in fact experiencing some of the challenges of being in our academic research institutions. They're left to those underrepresented scholars.
Wait. You're using a single op-ed piece, which relies almost entirely on anecdotal examples to make its points, to substantiate your claim. And a very odd claim at that. And would you believe that this op-ed article is the only external reference or citation offered over the course of this entire video?
For people that look like me, often those conversations are uncomfortable. We may feel like we're not prepared to have them, we don't know how to have them, or we don't think it's relevant to our science.
People that look like you. Making broad assertions of behavior and thinking based on skin color. Gosh, there's a word for that, isn't there?
I think another piece I've seen with my colleagues as well, who might be white identified individuals.
White identified individuals. Are you kidding me?
Is they perceive that if they talk about these issues, they'll be contributing to the problem. That talking about race and racial issues is contributing to the disparity. And I think the other thing is that many people are concerned that they themselves may be seen as prejudiced by bringing it up, perhaps when it's not even significant or important to a trainee. And how do you know that?
What? Focusing on race and talking endlessly about race might tend to contribute to beliefs and differences in people's character and abilities based on their skin color? Now you're just talking nonsense.
And so I think today we've elected an African American president twice. We've had legislative victories like the Civil Rights Act. And so there's been a conversation about, are we in a post-racial society? But I would say that no, we're not. Race and racism are alive, they're well, and they matter in science and in our research training.
I won't disagree that racism is alive and well, given that you can bring up the fact that a black president was elected twice in this country just after classifying people that look like you as all being of a particular mindset. You are depressingly correct and seemingly lacking any self-awareness.
And we know from a lot of research that race, in particular ethnicity and gender, are still some of the strongest predictors of where people end up in the labor market. So while many may argue that developing a research science career is really about the product of having good training and an individual's commitment, what is very clear is that there is not equal opportunity and a sense of belonging for all scholars of color. That the training landscape, the mentoring landscape is unequal in the biomedical science field.
Very well. Assertion has been made. Now, proof, please.
And so we know that the unconscious biases of privilege are unexamined assumptions about how people have had success, ignores our history, and inadvertently makes us focus on meritocracy, the assumption that people achieve their successes based on their individual efforts.
I just want to sit for a moment and muse on this statement. Okay, now let's listen to her one more time on this.
And so we know that the unconscious biases of privilege are unexamined assumptions about how people have had success, ignores our history, and inadvertently makes us focus on meritocracy, the assumption that people achieve their successes based on their individual efforts.
The assumption that people achieve their successes based on their individual efforts. Because, in reality, they did not achieve these things on merit, but rather on the basis of unconscious bias. Unconscious bias. The bias of being asleep. And so, we should not focus on meritocracy in science, but should instead focus on our history.
And that means that if we ascribe to meritocracy, then we interpret the world as fair. Then when individuals and scientists struggle or do not succeed, we assume it must be because of their own doing.
So if a scientist struggles or does not succeed, it's someone else's fault? It's never a matter of whether their work survives intellectual rigor and peer review? If they fail, they are blameless for their own mistakes? Maybe they're failing because their mentors are more concerned with dwelling on our history than they are with merit.
So when we have these kinds of challenges, a history of unexamined privileges, disparities in the training environment, mentoring that may not be as effective in addressing the cultural diversity that our trainees bring to the training environment. When we have a history of inequity in higher education, what is contributing to the problem then of the lack of diversity in the biomedical sciences?
Okay, sounds like we're about to be shown the evidence that backs up these claims and theories. Very well. I am ready to be educated.
We want to suggest that there are 4 ways, among many, that race and racism can still manifest in the life of a trainee. The first is bias. And bias is simply the assumptions that we have or the beliefs we have about a person that we make even before we get to know them. There are some biases and stereotypes, for example, about African Americans not being timely, having a more fluid sense of time. And so I'm very aware of the bias, for example, that might be towards me and how my behavior might be interpreted if I turn in something late or when I'm late with a review of an article, for example.
So, your awareness of racial stereotypes informs you of what others are thinking about you and how others interpret your actions based on what you look like. It's not like you're projecting these notions onto other people and then holding them to account for thoughts you think they're thinking. Got it.
A second dynamic is privilege. And privilege is simply the advantages that individuals get based on their background.
Based on their background. Well, I suppose if someone's background involved a wealthy family, then they would probably indeed have more privileges in life than someone without that kind of financial support. So, sure, background. I'm sure you meant background in that sense, right?
The third dynamic we want to talk about is racial microaggressions. And this is a term that's had some popular press in the last couple of years that really has to do with those subtle, indirect insults or slights that can be levied against a person based on their particular racial or ethnic group membership. So, for example, complimenting me on how articulate I am, with some implication that there's a surprise because of my racial ethnic identity that I would be able to articulate so well.
Offense is taken, never given. If you are looking to be insulted by every awkward phrase or sideways glance, then, surprise, you will be insulted. And if you then choose to impart a racial bias on the person you chose to take offense from, then, surprise, you will find racism everywhere. Your pain is self-chosen.
Lastly, we want to talk about stereotype threat. Again, a term that really has been used a lot, but captures these critical issues around feeling the vulnerability of fulfilling a stereotype about my group as an individual. The idea that something I do as one person represents my entire group.
Black people are not a group, and white people are not a group. These are demographics. I know, I'm being nitpicky, but I guess I just expect too much of people with the title doctor. But I digress. Now, if you believe that you, as an individual, making individual choices and actions, also carry the weight of representing your entire group, then I have 2 questions for you. A, who elected you to this position of representation? And if no one did, then B, is it possible that you have an overinflated sense of self-importance?
And that's a lot.
It's a lot, but when I think about all of that, what I'm struck by is how frequently many of the things you've described are just sort of, I would say, unacknowledged.
Frequently? How frequently? What is your data on the frequency of people having these thoughts? Or, more on point, not having these thoughts?
That they happen, we're not even aware of them happening. We may not be aware of doing them or benefiting from them.
So, not being aware of something, which is based on external interpretations of thought and action, is both proof of that something's existence and its inherent presence in the unaware person. Right. Now, please define for me the concept of original sin.
And so I think what we're really talking about when we think about mentors is how do we help mentors become more aware of both their own bias. You know, I have biases that I bring to this table, but also, you know, be aware of how these might affect our trainees, our mentees.
You say bias, but you put up a card citing racism. Bias is not the same as racism. Or do you not understand that?
And going back to the subtlety of these issues, I think that many of our colleagues are not doing anything deliberately.
That's right.
To be inequitable, to be dismissive, to be unresponsive. It's the not acknowledging these issues that actually is contributing to the problem.
Oh, of course not. They're not doing anything deliberately, or even knowingly, or consciously, but they do practice an ideology of racial superiority, and they need to confess, acknowledge that fact in order to be a better person.
So when we fail to recognize that these are realities for many people, that is, this is not made up, but these are actual documented concerns that many of our trainees are having, then we are better able to at least entertain the possibility of exploring those issues with our trainees and understand what their experience is like from their perspective without being presumptuous, because it doesn't matter to me, then it must not matter to my trainee, which would be erroneous.
That was the long and circuitous way of saying, listen and believe.
And so these are just a few of the factors that we just described and the ways that the research environment can be challenging for some trainees more than others, especially those from groups that have been historically underrepresented in the sciences.
Okay, wait a second. At the beginning of the video, you defined underrepresented groups as African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and some Southeast Asians. So, the research environment is more challenging for these demographics of people than for others, because everyone not like them is inherently racist and dismissive of their skills and worth. Is that what you are telling us?
And again, the issue is not about what mentors are doing directly to be inequitable or to be culturally unresponsive, but the fact that we need to be more aware and action-oriented in addressing these issues in a proactive way.
Okay, so it's not that science mentors are all inherently racist, but they do need to walk on eggshells around anyone who looks like they came from one of these underrepresented groups and treat them with special care on the chance that their unconscious biases, of which they may not even be aware of or are deliberately acting on, makes their student feel like they're being treated unfairly specifically because of the color of their skin. And in this way, by treating potential scientists like fragile glass, whose ideas and theories will necessarily encounter peer review and criticism over the course of their careers, by this, we will end racism and ensure the retention of all the valuable talent that biomedicine would otherwise be losing. Got it.
And yet, many mentors really don't feel equipped to address cultural diversity issues with their mentees. And it's not because they may not want to, but I think we have to remember a couple of things. Is few of us were ever trained to be mentors, just mentors. And then to think, well, were we ever trained to address issues of race or racism or cultural diversity in our mentoring? For most of us, the answer is no. We've learned that along the way, perhaps, or maybe we haven't.
Yes, because when I imagine an effective mentor in the biomedical sciences, the notion that they would have spent the bulk of their careers gaining expertise in the biomedical sciences, which they could then impart onto the next generation of scientists, that notion is completely wrong. What I really want is someone who has portioned off a segment of their time, education, and focus to worry about whether or not a student might get their feelings hurt and call them a racist if they point out any errors their student might make.
So I guess the question is, when you think about your colleagues, Angela, what do you think it's like for them? And what's it like for you to talk about race and racism in that academic setting? What's it like to bring in other factors that are often, in that what we call intersectionality, intersect in our identities, like gender or religion or sexual orientation?
Intersection. The process of collecting several molehills and piling them together in order to call the end result an erupting volcano.
Those are often conversations that I sometimes want to have and often do have, but that doesn't mean I don't get a little,
That's right.
little thing in my stomach before I open the door.
Is it a tapeworm?
Yours is in your stomach, mine is in my throat.
In your throat. I'll be a gentleman and just not go there.
So my concern specifically around these conversations, especially you talked about intersectionality as an African-American woman, is my concern that some of my colleagues, when I bring up issues around equity, for example, how as a pre-tenure member of the faculty, I was assigned certain committees like the diversity committee.
Of course, because you were.
Because I am the symbol of diversity.
That's right, the one and only.
That's right.
So you're telling me that if the diversity committee was populated entirely by white people, you wouldn't cite that as an example of unconscious bias and privilege. A, perhaps unintentional, but entirely problematic example of the institution being culturally unaware? Your school did precisely what you are demanding happen in the biomedical sciences. They promoted a member of an underrepresented group to a position of influence and authority. And for this, you laugh at them. You criticize them with the implication that they only chose you because you're black. And you are the one advising potential mentors to provide special consideration and sensitivity to students based on what they look like. Absolutely fascinating.
So in some of these conversations for raising these issues, especially for later stage, kind of early career faculty, my concern is that people will see me as having an angle or an axe to grind. Of course you would bring up these issues because look at the skin you're in and look at your chromosomal makeup. And so of course you would have these issues on your radar screen.
Our speakers are making blanket accusations of unconscious thought crimes being committed by scientists in the biomedical field because the demographic statistics alone prove that the field is passively or actively racist. They provide no data and they offer no evidence to substantiate these claims. Now, I don't think they have an angle or an axe to grind because of their genitals or their skin color. I think they have an angle and an axe to grind because they are telling us that they do. I am going to call it there for this episode. Our subject video is only about half over, and it is part 1 of a 2-part series. But I think I have given their opening gambit a decent examination. And for your homework, should you choose to accept it, please provide your advice for a biomedical mentor in the comments below on how best to handle the issue of cultural awareness. I will read these comments as they come in and assign awards to them as is appropriate. Good luck. As always, thank you for watching.